Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. Our next guest is a Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright. He's a Tony-winning actor. His classic plays consist of works such as Killer Joe, Bug, August Osage County. More recently, Mary Page Marlowe, Linda Vista. As an actor in film and TV, you've seen him in Homeland, The Lovers, Lady Bird, and now you can see Tracy Letts as Henry Ford II in the fantastically entertaining James Mangold film Ford v. Ferrari. Let's take a look.
How long have we known each other, Ken? I ever break a promise to you? I will put you in the driver's seat at Le Mans. You just shut your mouth and let me do my thing. All right. Come here.
Morning, Shelby.
Morning, Molly. Up yours. I'll go to hell.
That's it, folks. Ferrari wins the 24 Hours of Le Mans for the 5th consecutive year.
Mr. Ford, Ferrari has a message for you, sir.
What did he say?
He said Ford makes ugly little cars in ugly factories. And, he called you fat, sir. We're gonna bury Ferrari at Le Mans.
So the great Carroll Shelby is gonna build a car to beat Ferrari with a Ford.
Correct.
And how long did you tell them you needed? 200 or 300 years?
90 days.
Ford hates guys like us because we're different.
Well, we heard he's difficult.
Ken? No, Ken's a puppy dog.
It's awful. If there's a problem, the computer will find it.
Get some scotch tape and a ball of wool.
What are they doing?
Making your car faster.
That's more like it!
Ken Miles is not a Ford man. We're on the verge of something. And now you tell me that I can't have the best man in the world behind the wheel?
Give me one reason why I don't fire everyone starting with you.
Well, sir, we're lighter, we're faster. And that don't work, we're nastier.
Go ahead, Carol. Go to war.
You got a plan?
It's high risk.
I thought the whole point was to win the damned race.
If this were a beauty pageant, we just lost.
Looks aren't everything.
Everybody, please welcome the great Tracy Letts. Hey.
Thanks.
Sir, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
As I've told you a number of times, I'm a big fan. I'm excited to talk to you.
I appreciate that.
Henry Ford II.
Right.
What is he to you? Who is he to you? Because he's not Henry Ford. He is Henry Ford II.
He wasn't anything to me before we started this movie. I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know anything about this story. I don't know anything about racing. I don't know anything about cars. I can tell the difference between the red car and the blue car. That's about as far as I get. So he wasn't anything to me before we started.
So you said yes before you knew any of the things that you just said you didn't know.
Well, I read the script.
Oh, there you go.
And the script was great, and it was a real peek into this world and this little slice of hidden history, and it's just so damn much fun. I mean, the movie is a lot of fun. It's just really entertaining. I think that Jim Mangold, the director, has... I think he's got a real sense of purpose about entertaining an audience from start to finish, and this movie does that really beautifully.
I think he's got a real, I don't know him, but judging by his movies, this and Logan and you know, going back to Copland, he's got a real sense of purpose of being a craftsman in a way. There's no, like he is not trying to call attention to himself as a director. There are great shots and there are great directorial moments, but it's all in service of the story, which I like about this movie as well.
Yeah, and he's also... You know, it's such a huge film.
Yeah.
I don't know how you make a movie like this. It was just massive, a massive production. We would show up on the set where they had constructed the grandstand at Le Mans, and we were in Agua Dulce, California, and we had 400 extras and 40 cars and 40 stunt drivers, all in period clothing, 20 principal actors working, and he's keeping all of that in his mind. And the racetrack, which, as they point out in the movie, isn't really a racetrack. It's just a road. Part of it was in Agua Dulce. Part of it was outside of Atlanta. Part of it was in Georgia. He's having to keep that whole race in his mind as he's directing the movie. But then Jim is also really good at just crafting intimate scenes between actors. Because, let's face it, ultimately a movie like this works or doesn't work based on how much you like the characters. If it was about the cars and racing, it wouldn't work. But the fact is, it's about the people.
Yeah, you know, there is a fair amount of cars and racing in it, but by and large, it is the conversations between the people, the jokes that are told, the moments between them. I think especially with you and the intimidation that your character has looming over everybody as well. What kind of notes, what sort of conversations did you have with Mangold going into the shoots?
Not a lot.
All in the script?
It was kind of all in the script, and we sort of understood what was necessary there. I mean, the intrigue, the corporate intrigue, that the script does such a good job of delineating that. And so there wasn't a lot of need for conversation beforehand. Once you get on the set, and you're working out the scenes, and you're working out the physical politics of the scene, and who's got the power and who doesn't have the power, and who's wielding intimidation, and what people want, what they're willing to do to get it. I mean, the movie does such a beautiful job of helping us to understand what all of the principal characters have invested, right? The outcome is important to all of them for slightly different reasons, and I think we all understand that by the time we get to the big race.
I don't know much about Henry Ford II, but he's not Henry Ford, and it's my understanding, I mean, basically from watching the movie, it's my understanding that he's not a visionary in the way that his father was. He's the son of the visionary who's trying to keep the company running and trying to keep it a visionary company, but without ideas himself.
He's actually the grandson of the visionary. They do a strange thing in that family.
I know that little.
Well, there's Henry Ford, and then his son is Edsel Ford, and then Edsel Ford's son is Henry Ford II. And then Henry Ford II's son is Edsel Ford II. So they do a sort of
Rich people are weird.
Yeah, they do an odd thing. But in a sense, he was a visionary. I mean, first of all, how difficult is it to take over a company with your name on it, where your grandfather is not only a really important part of automotive history, but a big part of world history. I mean, Henry Ford's a really important figure in world history. And so the weight of that legacy on a guy like Henry Ford II, and at the time his company was, the Ford Motor Company's never been in that much trouble, but they had a disastrous release of the Edsel, car named for his father, and that was on his watch. And in the mid-'60s, the Ford Motor Company was seen as square. The movie talks about that some too. So the idea that they would enter the world of European auto racing, largely for public relations, and it actually did work. I mean, the Ford Motor Company got a big leg up in Europe as a result of participating in Le Mans. But, even beyond that, like I say, I don't understand how somebody wakes up every day with the weight of that on their chest. And it was one of the things that really compelled me about playing the part, the idea that this guy, of course, has genuine insecurity. And one of the main reasons they even go to the race is because he gets his feelings hurt by Ferrari.
That's what I liked as well. You had your first play produced in '91, right? Killer Joe?
I think wrote in 90 and produced in 93.
93?
Yeah.
How old were you?
28.
28 years old. And would you say, like, in the last 10 years or so, your acting career has kind of 10, 12 years, like, really taken off, or just had a different level of opportunity? Maybe
even less than 10 years.
Yeah.
What happened is that I did Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf at Steppenwolf, and we brought the show to Broadway, and Alex Gansa, who created Homeland, saw me in the show and asked me to play a part on Homeland. At the time, I hadn't worked on camera in maybe 7 years. Really? It had been a while. I mean, we don't make a lot of film and TV in Chicago. When we do, it's a week here, a day there. So I
used to make more, I feel like. Not to go too off the rails here, but I feel like Chicago used to have more production.
We go through phases.
Okay.
I mean, right now they make all those Chicago shows in Chicago, which is great for our local actors. So now I've totally lost my train of thought.
It was the first time that you had acted in 7 years.
Oh, right.
With Homeland.
I hadn't acted
Yeah.
in 7 years until Alex asked me to do Homeland. And so that's what sort of kicked off this latest period of on-camera work. And it's been great. It's been thrilling. I didn't expect it.
But what is that like to have come after you've won a Pulitzer for a play that you wrote? It's just this idea of a career takes different turns that you're not necessarily calculating, and you kind of have to ride the wave.
Not necessarily calculating. Absolutely not calculating. Just stumbling from one thing to the next but I always kept the writing and acting careers on separate tracks, parallel tracks. I would write when I was unemployed as an actor, and then I'd get an acting job and I'd go do that, and then one thing would lead to the next thing, and I've just had a very long, slow march up the hill.
Do you prefer it that way? Do you wish it was a less slow of a march, or do you think that's exactly how it should
Oh
be?
God, no. I think I would, if I had had more success as a younger man, I'd be a genuine monster. I have no doubt.
What kind of monster do you picture yourself?
Just egomaniacal, just selfish bastard.
You've been humbled enough to not be that at
just
this
like
point.
trashing dressing rooms and stuff and insulting people. Yeah.
You're acting in your play The Minutes on Broadway in March, right? You open in March?
Yes.
Do you often act in your own plays?
I've never done it
Right? Because
before.
you just said you keep them separate.
I've never done it before. I never wanted to do it. I don't want to do it now.
Why did you never want to do it?
I just didn't think I'd be as good at either thing if I was trying to do both at the same time. And I also think that I the kind of writing and acting I admire is where you're not too conscious of the artist at work, right? So you're not. There are examples of tour de force writing that I love, but it's just not my style. I prefer the writer to disappear and you're just absorbed in the characters telling the story. And I've always been afraid if I'm in the thing, people will be very conscious of that's the guy who wrote it. This is what he thinks. This is, I don't want to draw that kind of attention to myself.
That's true. Your plays are always beautifully structured and written, but they do not call attention to themselves in like long-winded monologues or rants where we're supposed, like, for instance, a play that's up right now that I love, Heroes of the Fourth Turning, is very much calling attention to itself, to its writing beautifully. You never seem interested in that. Do you have to cut yourself off when you're writing? Do you notice when you start doing that and pull back?
Well, I've gotten better about it over the years. I mean, when I first did it, we'd put something up on its feet. I mean, the beauty of the theater, of course, is that we can put stuff in performance and see it, and I can make changes while we're in production. And I would see things, and I would say, oh, that monologue just sounds like me. It sounds like you can hear as like the character stopped talking and now the writer is talking. Yeah. And so I would cut it. Sometimes I'd cut great stuff. I'd say, wow, that's a great speech, but it's got to go. It's drawing attention to itself as a piece of writing.
Linda Vista, your play that just closed on Broadway and I think is running in France right now as well, right?
Yeah.
Felt like, and I don't know you personally in any way, and I don't think it's about you, but all of your grumpiest feelings thrown into what those grumpy feelings would make into a human being if that was only what he felt.
It's amazing how many people seem to believe that it is some version of me or alternate version of me.
I felt like it was a version of me while I was watching it, but older in a certain way, like a version of the part of me that is cranky and like can't get over the things that I'm criticizing all the time. As a human, right. I have a duality. Like I can do that.
Sure.
But if I couldn't, I would be miserable and living in like that in squalor.
So there you go. I was writing about you and not me. Yeah, he's a grumpy guy and he has some rants about contemporary culture, and so I put some of my own feelings about that in there, but some of it's also exaggeration. Like he goes off on a big rant about Radiohead. The truth is, I don't have a lot of strong feelings about Radiohead, so he does, I don't.
Which I have to be honest, not having strong feelings about Radiohead is the same as his rant about Radiohead in some way, as a fan of Radiohead. Tell me about The Minutes, the play that is coming to Broadway in March.
It's 90 minutes of a city council meeting in a small fictional town, told in real time, and 11 members of a city council having a closed meeting. That sounds really boring when I describe it like that.
It sounds like 12 Angry Men or a take on 12 Angry Men.
Ah, interesting. I did watch hundreds of hours of really boring city council meetings on YouTube in order to write the play, and they are incredibly boring. Hopefully
Kind
the
of
play's
fun?
not that boring.
For research purposes, I would bet?
No, not fun at all.
Really?
No. If you're having trouble sleeping, let me recommend watching city council meetings on YouTube. It's painful.
But that is, you're digging, right? And
Yeah.
you're digging and it's boring. And then all of a sudden, one of those people in the city council meeting says or does something that triggers you. I mean, that's got to feel incredible to a dude.
Sure, yeah, no, that's true. There was a conversation about lost or stolen bicycles at how they're collecting and disposing of lost and stolen bicycles. I saw in a city council meeting, and now it plays a major part in the play. It's true. I had to sift through a lot of stuff to get to that. The play it's a political play, and I was writing it before the 2016 election, so it's not about Trump. It's not about Trumpism, whatever that is. It's about the way we conduct our politics, and it's about two different philosophies about how we want to move forward as a country and a culture. Right. That's what it's about. And it's outrageously funny.
It's important to not be about Trumpism right now, because I think that Trumpism is a quagmire of lack of ideas in some ways, because he's just a consequence of a lot of other things that have been swirling around for a long time.
I just don't know how we see it while we're in it. It's like, how would you write about a tornado while you're in the trailer that's being picked up and moved around the countryside? I just don't. We don't have any perspective on it yet. I don't think we don't have the ability to really know quite what it is we're in, because for one thing, it's changing by the hour. Right, the political moment is not a settled landscape. It is changing every moment. So it would be hard to write about that. So I'm hoping that it's a bit of a step back from all that and a look at a bigger picture.
Good, because the most annoying thing about this period of time right now is that we are not far enough removed to have perspective, yet everybody has perspective.
Everybody wants to tell you what's happening
Yeah.
to them, and it's exhausting.
You wrote the play, you wrote Killer Joe in 91, performed in 93. Did you know you were a playwright before that? I know you were acting in theater. What made you start writing? Had you been writing?
I'd written my whole life. I'd written since I was a little kid. I had written a couple of bad screenplays. At the time, I had done
Screenplays that you were trying to sell?
Yeah.
So like as marketable as possible?
Well, who knows?
Can I
mean,
ask-
clearly not. But
Can I ask what they were?
Well, they didn't get made.
I know, that's what's fun.
They're not a romantic comedy, a thriller. I mean, they didn't work out. But I was acting a lot in storefront theater in Chicago, which is where a lot of great work happens. And I was reading a lot of Jim Thompson and David Goodis and other pulp fiction writers, and I just never seen it on stage.
Yeah.
So I thought, I wonder if there's a way to put this on stage. I wonder if there's a way to make this, make a play out of this, make this a theatrical event. So I wrote Killer Joe, and you ask if I felt like a playwright. I didn't feel like a playwright after I wrote it. I thought, I'm an actor. I've always had an interest in writing. I've written a play. It's going to be a one-off thing. The critics panned it. I mean, it was just miserably panned. The first review I ever got was in the Chicago Sun-Times, and it said about Killer Joe, you always remember the first bad one, it said, a hideous carnival of brutality and degradation that leaves you numb and dirty.
That's a compliment.
I wanted to put on the poster, actually.
Yeah, that is an incredible statement.
We then did get a rave review in the Chicago Tribune, which was the paper of record in Chicago, and so Richard Christensen, the critic there, championed the play, and we ran a long time. And then we took the play to the Edinburgh Festival, and from Edinburgh we went to a small theater in London, and then from London we transferred to the West End. And I went over to London at that point, and of course the London press treated me like a playwright. I had never been treated like a playwright before. They didn't know I was an actor. So that was the first time, really, I was like, oh, I guess I'm a playwright. I guess I do that, too.
I got to write another one of these now.
Yeah, and in fact, there was a theater in London that said, we'd love to have you all back to do another play. Do you have anything else in the same vein? And I wrote Bug. Yeah. And that's how Bug happened. We actually premiered in London with that show.
Killer Joe and Bug both became movies directed by the great William Friedkin.
Right.
Billy Friedkin. Of Chicago as well.
Yeah, right.
What was that collaboration like with him? Was it close, or was it just sort of like?
Oh, it was very close. He's a dear friend and mentor, and Billy's he's a great man.
Yeah.
I was actually doing a production of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, not the production that came to Broadway, but an earlier production. I was doing it at the Alliance Theater in Atlanta. Bug was happening in New York at the time, and Billy called me and said, it's William Friedkin. And I thought it was a joke. I didn't think it was really William Friedkin, but he had seen the play. And he said, I just want to tell you how much I liked it. I said, I really appreciate the call. The next day he called back and he said, I want to make a movie out of it. Will you come out to Los Angeles and talk to me about that? So as soon as the play closed, I flew out to LA and met with Billy, and we talked about it. And he's, to this day, he is the person in the film business who's been the most respectful of writing of anybody I've ever dealt with.
Yeah, because those two movies are very close to the script and I think to the plays.
Yeah.
You know, especially Killer Joe. Killer Joe is very close to the play.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was that was his intention. I assume.
Yeah,
when he talked
absolutely. He even, I think the credit at the beginning of Killer Joe says something like William Friedkin's film of Tracy Letts' Killer Joe, right?
Yeah,
Something like that.
Yeah. And then when August got adapted to film, that was a little bit of a different situation, right? In terms of
very different.
Sticking to the script and
Well, I wrote the script, and then they took it away from me, and they made a lot of changes, mostly cuts. They didn't add stuff, thank God. They didn't. There's not material in there that I didn't write, but they cut it drastically from the version I had written.
That's got to be such a strange feeling that your first two plays that you kind of just wrote, it sounds like, were adhered to beautifully by an incredibly respectful director, and then your Pulitzer Prize-winning play that really, I wouldn't say put you on the map, but I mean, it really made you a household name, at least for people who like theater, was taken away from you that way.
Yeah, strange, huh? Seemed strange to me at the time.
Strange. Too generous of a word.
I don't know. I felt like, when the producers were saying, well, it's got to be this length. Otherwise, we can't have multiple screenings in a night, right? If it's above a certain length, you can only play once in a cinema in the evening. So it's got to come down to this length. And my response would be, you saw the play, right? I mean, the thing you liked about the play, you're wanting to get rid of that. I don't understand why you want to make a movie of this if you want to change what the thing was that worked. But,
they just want the property.
The truth is, plays don't often make good movies. I mean, it's just a different thing. It's just a different relationship. The audience's relationship to the work is different in a cinema than it is in a theater. There's live people in a room. You act differently. There's a reason you can eat popcorn at the movies and you can't do it when you go see live people in a play. There's a level of tension and interest in a theater audience that you're just never going to really have in the cinema. Or as I like to say, plays are better than movies, and movies are better than television. There you have it.
Is that how you feel?
I do.
What about great television? Are you at this point not even like an admirer of great TV? Is it still like, well, look, it's good, but it's still TV?
My wife and I started working in TV a few years ago, and so we've watched a lot of it, and then we kind of stopped. I don't know. We watched a lot, and then we stopped watching a lot. It got to a point where it seemed I just didn't need to watch so much of it.
Yeah, I watch what I have to watch for work, and then people are like, what are you watching for fun? And I'm like, I'm not. There's just too much. There's
Right.
books and there's good movies that I haven't seen
right.
and plays that I should go see. I can't.
Right.
I don't want to do 12 hours of a cop show. I'm sorry.
That's right. And sometimes you get, halfway through the season, you're like, do I have to keep watching this? Nobody's making me watch this. Why am I watching this? I'm going to stop watching this.
I barely want to know what's going to happen.
I offered this theory to Greta Gerwig, by the way, that plays are better than movies and movies are better than TV, and she agreed with me, and she said, and I think you can prove it too, because if you think about the best experience you've ever had at the theater versus the best experience you've ever had watching a movie versus the best experience you've ever had watching a TV show, that's the way they stack up. The best play you ever saw is more memorable than the best movie. The best movie you ever saw is more memorable than the best TV show. I'm sticking by it. I'm sticking by this theory.
I would mostly agree, except I would say when I was 15, I saw Von Trier's Dancer in the Dark in the movie theater, and I don't know if you've ever seen that movie,
Sure.
but it's tragic and it's so grandiose and melodramatic, and I had never seen anything like that at the time, and I had to like leave the theater to catch my breath. It was like
The only
so
thing that's upsetting to
overwhelming.
me about that story is that you were 15 when Dancer in the Dark came out.
Sorry, I could see that. You heard nothing after that. I saw it in your eyes. Just, your eyes went, you motherfucker. If you don't mind, as someone who admires your work, do you mind if I ask you some questions about your process as a writer?
I don't know.
I don't know if you have a book that
I
you're
don't
planning
have
about your process.
I don't have any
that you wanna
secrets
hide.
about any of this.
Are you
It's so unspecial.
are you an everyday writer?
No, God, no. No.
You get an idea and you have to formulate and then you start writing?
Yeah.
How many drafts do you find that you usually go through?
By the time a play is up in front of an audience, well, I mean, but it depends on what production you're talking about. Say the Minutes. Let's say the Minutes went through 5 complete drafts before it was up in front of an audience in Chicago. And it'll go through another 3+ revisions before it's seen in New York.
Is that like page 1 rewrite kind of thing, or just sort of like tinkering?
That's page 1 rewrite.
And how long do you wait until you even show anybody something that you're working on? Are you a person who can be like, check out the first act? I'm trying to figure out what's
No,
coming next.
not usually. Normally, I have to finish the thing and then I show it to my wife. She's always my first reader.
Oh, really? And how do the two? How do you handle her criticism?
She's very good about the way she handles her criticism. I give it to her, and I'm nervous to hear her response, and but I don't want to look over her shoulder, so I kind of hover in the next room and listen for where she's laughing, and we'll kind of go in and peek over her shoulder, and I want to know what it is she finds funny, and then we have a cup of coffee, and she tells me what she thought about it, and she's a great reader. She has a great editorial mind.
Great actress as well.
She's a great actress. She's read a lot of scripts, and so she usually offers very insightful comments and nothing that's too deflating.
Yeah, that can be the worst part, especially if you're very early in a draft of something and someone says, oh, this is kind of like this thing. And you're like, I hate that thing.
Yeah,
What do you mean it's like that? Yeah.
Working at Steppenwolf as I do in Chicago, I work with a lot of great collaborators. And so when I take a play into them and we read it for the first time, the great fear is that they're going to say, this is terrible. And the hope is that they're going to celebrate it and say, this is the greatest play. And the truth is, they roll their sleeves up as collaborators and say, now let's go to work on this. Let's figure this out. Because all new plays need work. They need a lot of work. And they're very skilled in the business of interrogating new work.
There's really no such thing as a visionary or a master. It's all about collaboration.
For me, it is. Look, maybe a genius gets a different kind of response.
I think people would call you a genius, though.
Well, they would be wrong. I'm a hard worker, is what I am. I work hard at my craft.
Like, for instance, we think about August, right? Which at this point is considered genius, masterful. When you bring that in to your collaborators the first time, how much of it is a mess compared to where it ends up later on?
I would say that from the first draft until, say, the play was seen in Broadway, fully 40% of it was changed, altered, cut, maybe changed drastically. So they go through a lot of changes.
Do you find that your bones generally stay the same in the script, but it's like more cosmetic, or little scenes here and there, or little moments?
Somewhere in between that. The bones, the structure, I pay a lot of attention to structure, a lot of attention to form. So hopefully the form is pretty solid by the time I get in there. But to say that it's just tinkering or it's a line here or a line there, sometimes I'm a little slow, and it takes me a while before I'll see a scene, actors are performing a scene, and I go, oh, that's what that scene's about. I didn't really realize what that scene was about until I heard it 100 times, and then I'll rewrite that thing top to bottom.
Well, because sometimes you can just feel that a scene needs to go somewhere or that a certain thing needs to happen. So you have to write that feeling because you can't get to the next thing that is a plot that you know is going to happen, but you don't know what that scene really means. You just know that you felt something there.
That's right, which is why the whole thing for me is it's a process. It starts here, and it's just a long process to get from here to there to the point where I say, not it's perfect. I just say, I'm done with it. I can't work on it anymore. Let's publish it, and that's who I was at the time at which I signed off on saying that thing is done. That's all I can say about it.
Speaking of structure, one of my favorite things that you've done is Mary Page Marlowe. Right, that's the name of the play. Excuse me, right?
Mary Page Marlowe.
Mary Page Marlowe. I saw that at Second Stage with Tatiana Maslany and a number of other great actors in it. And I loved what you did with structure in that play and how you basically took a 3-act structure and moved the scenes around to all different places, so it wasn't chronological, yet you still had the satisfaction of a chronological story being told. Where did you get that idea? How did you do it? How did you figure it out?
Well, the idea was emotional, really. The idea was an emotional idea about the way life sometimes feels to me, which is not linear. My mother passed away. I had just started working on the play and thinking about the play, and then my mother passed away. And, you go through that period where you're going through scrapbooks and you're going through photographs and you're going through paperwork, and it's such a jumble, and you think about a person's journey in life from this point to that point, all the people they met, all the triumphs and tragedies they went through, all the flaws they had, the great qualities they had. My mom was a great, complicated woman, and so somehow in that time, in the swirl of my grief, and in that time, it seemed to me that life didn't feel linear, and that in some ways her life was a kind of a jumble. Because isn't life a jumble? Right? You're going through a maze. You don't, like most mazes, you don't know how you got to the end. Once you're at the end, you're able to kind of look back and say, oh, that's the way I got here. But that's how, so it was a way for me to just try to explore a way that life feels. That's all I can say about it. So it was an emotional basis for the idea. But then, of course, there's the actual carpentry. There's the nuts and bolts of what are the scenes, what are the 11 scenes you would choose from your life that represent who you are.
And how do you organize them in a way so that maybe at first blush they feel kind of like a random moment in life, but by the time we get to that 11th scene, you have actually placed the sort of basic tenets of dramatic structure throughout.
Yeah, well, that was the challenge. And in fact, there was a lot of time spent with little scraps of paper saying, oh, this is the scene with this guy from her life. This is the scene, because it's not you choosing the 11 scenes from your life. It's somebody else choosing the 11 scenes from your life that represent who you are. So you take them and you start mixing them up and say, well, if this scene happens here, then what is happening here? And then once I had those scenes in a kind of jumble on the desk and I had the order that I wanted, then I wrote the play in that order. I didn't write the scenes and then mix them up. I wrote them in that order, and that's why they have the sense of rising and falling action that you get in a play. It's like, this is the point where we need a dramatic spike, and this is the point where it mellows out a bit, and this is the place where the action is really rising. It was hard, but that's part of the fun of that particular puzzle of a play.
Yeah, it reminded me, the general feeling of the play reminded me of The Easter Parade, the book by Richard Yates, which is just about these two sisters whose lives are kind of a series of disappointments.
Oh, I don't know that book.
Oh, it's beautiful. when you write, and this is my last question for you before we get to audience questions, but when you sit down to write a rough draft, does it generally take you a certain amount of time? Are you a quick writer for the first draft, or is it?
I'm very fast.
Really?
Very fast. I think about a thing, normally, there are exceptions to this, but I think about a thing for a long time, months or even years.
You've got notes.
Yeah. I don't take a lot of notes because I think if it's a good idea, it'll stick with me. Who knows? Maybe I've lost a lot of great ideas because I didn't take notes. Sometimes I'll do some longhand writing, but eventually I get to the point where I say, okay, I'm ready to start this. And then I write. I write on a typewriter, and I write very quickly. So I will finish a first draft in weeks, a period of weeks. And then there's the process on the other end of it, the editorial process, and we're going through workshops and rehearsals, previews, performances, separate productions. You know, that's a years-long process of refinement.
Okay, a couple questions from the audience. Who has a question? Right here. Hi.
I'm absolutely in awe that you're able to engage in two separate disciplines at such a high level at the same time. How does your acting influence your playwriting and vice versa?
They're both storytelling, right? So there are ways in which they are different, and then there are ways in which they're similar. There are ways in which they rely on observation, mimicry. The best way to tell a story, the most effective and efficient and entertaining way to tell a story. Because I've been really steeped in work in the theater, and I've been pursuing both of these disciplines for a long time, I am able, I hope, to take some of the things I learned from one discipline into the other discipline. You see actors struggling sometimes with language to make the most efficient and entertaining choice, and I see the language getting in their way or getting in my way when I'm an actor. It's like, isn't there a quicker way to communicate this idea? And so when I'm writing, I think, you know, I'm going to steer away from that kind of writing. I'm going to write this in a way that an actor is able to put this forward. And I do think they kind of cross-pollinate. They inform each other. I know that as an actor, the writer has spent a lot of time thinking about the way every sentence is crafted. I know that they've gone over those sentences time and time again. They've gone over the punctuation. If it's well written, the punctuation has been seriously considered. So I, as an actor, I try to get every word right. I try to examine every piece of punctuation. I think there's something in there for me. So they inform each other a lot. I also have to say that I'm always envious of the one I'm not doing. If I'm acting, I think, oh man, the writer has it easy because he doesn't have to put himself out here, or he doesn't have to do it 8 times a week. He's done. He gets to go home. And then when I'm a writer, I think, man, the actor has it easy. He's only responsible for doing his one little part of this. He doesn't have to worry about the whole shebang. So I don't know. I'm very fortunate that I get to do both at this level. Like I say, it's been a long, slow process to get me here. One thing has helped the other is the answer to that.
Do you often turn down roles because you're in the midst of writing or working on a play? Do you find that you have to...
Well, I don't. If I'm working on a play,
That you wrote, not that you're acting in.
Right. I will... Look, I block out bits of time and I tell my agent, don't tempt me. Don't tell me what I'm missing. Don't tell me what could happen. I don't want to know. I've blocked out this period of time. When I'm through that period of time, we can talk about what's next. But there is no plan. There's never been a plan. It's just kind of blindly stumbling from one thing to the next.
You know, we should ask you, you've been a person who's collaborated with some of the same people on a regular basis. You know, you're known to have kind of discovered Mike Shannon in Chicago in some way.
That flatters me. The truth is, Mike Shannon was a great actor, and he was bound to be discovered.
Right.
But we worked together in Off Loop Theater in Chicago.
Yeah, and you didn't discover her, but you've worked now in 2 movies with Greta Gerwig. What has that collaboration been like? Is it a collaboration, or is it just that she likes you and she cast you again?
I'm a total beneficiary of that relationship. We did a movie together called Wiener Dog, a Todd Solondz movie.
I love that movie, and I feel like you were playing Deado.
Well, we didn't actually work together in the film. We were in separate vignettes of the movie. We met each other at the premiere of the movie at Sundance, and she chatted with me and my wife at the party, and I think that's the point at which she realized, oh, he's not the guy he plays in movies and TV. He's actually a kind of an old softy. And so that's when she thought about casting me in Lady Bird, and she did, and we became friends. And I mean, who would have turned down Lady Bird? It was so fantastic, and it was fantastic on the page, and I was so grateful not to have to put on a suit. I was so grateful to be able to just wear clothes and read a newspaper, and drink a cup of coffee, which is who I am. So I was so grateful for that. We became friends, and then she was working on Little Women at the time. She sent me her adaptation. She said to get my comments or my notes. I think, in fact, she knew she had written a fantastic thing, and she wanted to show it to me because I had no notes. It's a brilliant adaptation. And so then she called and said, you want to do a part in this? And I said, I'll do anything. I don't care. I'll do anything.
I'm curious what it was like working with Todd Solondz. I'm a fan of Todd Solondz, and I've heard that he's fairly meticulous on set with his actors, almost to the point of line reads at times.
Very meticulous, very specific, very passionate, a great eye, a great way. I mean, Todd has a unique way of looking at the world, but that's why he's a great artist.
Yeah.
And Wiener Dog, God, I love it. My wife's mother recommended it to people she worked with, and then they got mad at her because it's not for everybody. But Todd's vision is so particular, it's so specific, and it's actually I find it very beautiful. I think Todd has a beautiful vision of the world, and so I would do anything that guy wanted me to do.
I get frustrated when people say he's a misanthrope and that his movies are hateful. I find them to be extremely beautiful.
I think that one quality that a lot of the people I work with seems to share, I was thinking about this recently because I just did something on Asa Jacobs' new movie, Asa Who Made the Lovers. Asa, Greta, James Mangold, they're romantics. Ultimately, they're in a pretty cynical time. They have romantic visions of the world. They communicate them in different ways, very different ways. Todd, too, of course. I meant to include him in that group. I actually think they're romantics.
You not being a filmmaker but a playwright, do you consider yourself a romantic?
Sure.
No one wants to say out loud that they're a romantic, do they?
I just did it.
Yeah. Well, barely. It was sure. Yeah. Why
Sure.
not?
Yeah, sure. I'm a romantic.
One more.
Can't you tell?
Hi. As you know, the career of an artist is rarely linear. How have you sustained the highs and lows in your career, and have you ever experienced a feeling of burnout?
That's a really good question because I've had highs and lows. I've had both. I can say that even in the lows, I was really happy to be an artist and call myself an artist. And I never wanted to be anything else. And even in the times when I struggled, I was happy to be working on things that meant something to me. I was happy to be working with people I love. I was happy to travel. I was happy not to have a regimented schedule. I was happy at the variety of my life, the variety and richness of my life, even when things were really hard and there was some real poverty and real struggle. I also think I saw people around me going through some of those struggles who were turning bitter, and I recognized that that was a real pitfall for artists.
Usually actors, I think.
You can, well, I think it happens to writers too. I think you can get really bitter. You can get jealous. You can have a lot of those feelings, and they're not they're not helpful to you as an artist, and they're certainly not helpful to you as a human being. So I guess it's hard to say now in retrospect, but I like to think that during those times I would just think, well, those are other people's blessings, and your time is coming or not, and just go back to just do your work. Just do your work. You know, I had started in Chicago. I'd spent about 11 years in Chicago when I went out to Los Angeles for about 4 years. And I did some work in LA. I did some TV shows. I did the Seinfeld Festivus episode is something that comes up a lot. I did some work out there. But I mean, that Seinfeld episode was 4 days out of a year, maybe, that I worked. So it wasn't really feeding the soul. And I went back to Chicago to work in the theater and just put my head down and do my work. And really going back to Chicago at that point felt like a vow of poverty, because you can't make any money in Chicago theater, but you do great work that people care passionately about, and I cared passionately about it. And a few years later, Steppenwolf added me to the ensemble, and then I wrote August Osage County, and so much for the vow of poverty. But it pays off to just focus on the work and on living a full life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ford v Ferrari comes out Friday or today. It's Friday today.
It is. It's out.
It's out right now.
You can leave here and go to the movie theater and put money down and see it.
And you should. You should see the movie on the big screen. It's beautiful to look at.
I'm so glad you said that. Do not. If you're watching Ford versus Ferrari on your phone, you are not watching Ford versus Ferrari. This movie was made to be seen on a big screen. It's one of the things I love about it.
Absolutely. Tracy Letts, everybody. Let's hear it.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.